Hi everyone, my name is Apuraj Garakapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Apai. Have you
Ride into another world.
ever wondered what would have happened if the Straw Hats were reborn with all their memories? Would they be able to change all the bad things that have happened to them, or would it make their journey even worse? Well, before we answer that, let's start with Luffy. Being reborn with all of his memories, Luffy would be confused, but he would try to keep quiet about the situation. He would do this in order to relive his childhood in the same way, spending his time with Ace and Sabo. Of course, since he's Luffy, he would slip up now and then, but not enough to raise any suspicion. He'd still eat the Nika fruit even in this scenario, but Shanks wouldn't lose his arm saving him since Luffy would be smart enough to avoid the bandit. After some time, Luffy would even start training his haki on his own, and would single-handedly defeat the Blue Jam Pirates. In order to let Ace and Sabo live their life, he would let both of them go the same way they did in the main story, knowing that both of them would eventually end up with people who would care about them. Once he turned 17, Luffy would also leave the island himself and meet up with Kobe again on Alvida's boat. After dealing with Alvida, they'd head straight for Shell's town to pick up Zoro. Now, before they do that, I need to explain what happened to Zoro in this timeline, since his backstory is completely different now. Obviously, now that he's been reborn, Zoro's first thoughts were to start training as hard as he can. Due to everything he knows about Salisvenship, he easily defeated Kuhina during their duels, and she actually had to catch up to him this time around. However, I still believe the two would become really good friends and make a promise to each other. With his future memories, Zoro might even be able to save Kuhina from dying in this version, warning her about her accident beforehand. Afterwards, being by far the most skilled swordsman in the dojo, Zoro is gifted Wado Ikimongi by Kuhina's father. Growing tired of his little village, Zoro took Kuhina's father's advice and left the island in order to find stronger opponents. This young Zoro then spent years building up a reputation throughout the East Blue, and he became much more feared than before. Despite spending most of his time lost by a complete accident, he'd unintentionally wind up in Shell's town only days before Luffy's arrival. Zoro's battle with Axahan Morgan and his men didn't last more than a second. After the battle, nobody dared to ask him to leave, and he spent the next few days lounging around waiting for Luffy. Soon the dojo would reunite at the bar. They'd both immediately celebrate meeting each other again before leaving the island together. On their way to Orange Town, they'd share stories with each other about their solo adventures, talking about the things they did differently. At Orange Town, Zoro would point out how this place looks familiar, but off at the same time. That's when they'd come across Nami bossing around Buggy and his crew, making them fix up all the damage they caused. So how did this happen? Well, to understand that, we'd need to look at what Nami had been up to since she was reborn. When Nami first opened her eyes again, she found herself being carried around a war-torn land by her sister Najiko. Things went practically the same for Nami after that, except she was a lot more grateful for every moment she got with her mom. While growing up, Nami still continued to steal from other pirates, but this time it was so her family could have a better life. With the money saved up, Nami then waited for Arlon's arrival, but he never arrived in this timeline. Why? Oh, don't worry. We are going to explain that soon enough. Anyway, confused by this, Nami continued to polish her combat skills, becoming formidable with a staff. She also kept up with her cartography practice and read many books on the topic over the years. Once it finally came time for Nami to leave and reunite with the other Straw Hats, she didn't want to go, but her sister Najiko convinced her, promising that she and Belmer would be just fine without it. That's when Nami decided to hitch a boat with Belmer's blessings and made her way to Orange Town. It wasn't long before she handled Buggy by herself, and his crew just gave him immediately after that. While the OG3 Straw Hats were beginning to catch up with each other, Buggy and his crew would try to ambush them, but Luffy and Zoro would send them flying. Catching up over some tea with the Orange Town mayor, Nami left behind a good chunk of wealth for the townsfolk, which left Luffy and Zoro wondering what the hell happened to her. With 2 solid bumps on their heads, the boys would be surprised to learn Nami's obsession with money disappeared over time, since most of it came from the trauma of losing her mom in the original timeline. Soon after, they would leave Orange Town and arrive at the shores of Sura Village. On the coast, they'd spot the Going Merry with the Usopp pirates living inside. You see, when Usopp was reborn, he found himself with his mother again. Only this time, Usopp spent more time cheering her up in his own way, telling her countless stories of his time with the Straw Hats. Once his mother passed away, Usopp grew closer to Kaiya and foiled Captain Kudo's plan to betray her before it even began. He used his intellect to set traps and expose Kudo, and later chased him off of the island. In exchange for his help, Usopp requested Kaiya to gift him the Going Merry, knowing that he'd soon need it when the other Straw Hats arrived. Luffy would be impressed, saying that Usopp took Kudo all by himself, and the crew would immediately continue their journey towards Bear Reef. On the way there, Usopp showed his fellow crewmates a whole host of new weapons he had created over the years. He even sniped down the giant bird that tried to eat Luffy before. Upon their arrival, the Straw Hats would find the Bear Reef has a special docking port specifically made for their ship. Let in by some of the other chefs, they'd get treated to an impressive feast meant solely for them. While other guests of the restaurant would get kicked out, Sanji would show up with tears in his eyes. But the others didn't know was that this time around, Sanji's childhood was a lot less rough than before. Although his mother still died, Sanji had a much stronger will and didn't mind being isolated and picked apart by his elder brothers. He secretly trained his picking style all over again, and even began practicing the techniques he learned from the Akamas. Eventually, Sanji decided to show what he was. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Appai grow naturally, capable of, and took out all 3 of his brothers in one go. After getting recognized by his father, Judge, Sanji challenges Old Man too, but ultimately lost the fight. After that, he left the German kingdom and boarded the same ship. He'd inevitably meet Zeffen. From here, things went mostly the same, but he was a lot more lenient and grateful towards Zeff. He even shared his food with him so that Zeff wouldn't have to eat his own leg. Their friendship ended up transitioning into a joint partnership where they both ran the Baratie as co-owners and head chefs. From then on, he simply waited for Luffy and the others to come back. After catching up and spending a few days at the sea restaurant, the crew would finally come face to face against the Krieg pirates. This time, every member of the crew would participate in bringing the Krieg pirates down well before Mihawk even arrives. Once the warlord reached Baratie, he'd be shocked to see someone had sliced Krieg's ship in half already. He would then see Zoro, and since there's something special about the kid, he would offer to duel Zoro, but the Zorthman would respectfully refuse, knowing full well that he isn't ready yet. Still, he would promise to duel Mihawk sometime in the future. With that done, the Straw Hats would then pay Kokoyashi village a visit at Nami's request. Upon arrival, they'd be introduced to everyone in the village and be treated to a feast at Belmer and Nijiko's home. After spending some time with her family, Nami would then inform them that she wouldn't be back for the next few years. Her family would obviously be supportive, and so would the rest of the town. After this quick little pit stop, the crew would then head straight for Logtown. There, each of them would do what they did before in the main story, but with some minor changes. The buggy Elvita Pirate Alliance wouldn't dare mess with Luffy this time around. Usopp would easily defeat Daddy Masterson with his superior sniping skills. Nami would go shopping and would purchase a log pose early, while Zoro would come face to face with his childhood friend, Huina. You see, since Huina survived this time around, she would be going around collecting the rare blades all over the world. After pretending to get chased off the island by Smoker and squad, the Straw Hats would quickly ride up Reverse Mountain, making the same pledge they did before. The arrival at the Twin Caps would mostly end up going the same way, but they'd get along with Crocus a lot faster. Luffy would even promise Laboon and Crocus that they'd bring back Brook with them, a name the pair hadn't heard for over 50 years. Crocus would naturally question how these kids knew someone from way back then, but he wouldn't get a straight answer from Luffy. The crew would then blow Vivi's identity as a princess immediately, which would leave her completely confused. Still, with no one else to turn to for help, she would agree to go with them. Eventually, Vivi would witness Zoro take out every bounty hunter on the island on his own, before they even thought about ambushing the rest of the crew. Later on, she would also witness the crew sweep the floor with Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, and would know she made the right decision by following them. At Little Garden, the crew would quickly befriend the giants and take care of Mr. 3 right before Robin's sudden arrival with some revolutionaries. This would confuse everyone present, and on their way to Drum Island, Robin would explain exactly what happened to her. In this timeline, you see, when Robin was reborn, she caught a glimpse of her mother before she set off on her expedition. Over the years, Robin paid extra attention to her studies and became a scholar much faster than before. She spent her time copying every bit of information she came across and began constructing a true version of history. It took some time, but she was eventually reunited with Saul and even her mother when she returned with a cipher pole agent. Before that, Buster Call was even initiated. Robin, with Saul's help, convinced much of the local population to evacuate early, and while some people listened, most of the scholars still chose to stay and protect the library, which ultimately led to their deaths. Because Robin knew about the attack on Ohara in advance, she and Saul managed to find the small boat in time and escape. From that point on, both became wanted fugitives, and Saul became something of a father figure to her. He taught her how to survive and protected her from the Marines that came after them. After some time, the two returned to Ohara to pay respects to their fallen friends, but to their surprise, they found Dragon and Dr. Vegapunk there. After a brief conversation with Dragon, both Robin and Saul decided to join the freedom fighters, seeing it as the only way to fight back against the Crew government. From that point on, Robin spent years with the freedom fighters and the Revolutionary Army, learning all sorts of new techniques and abilities before eventually reuniting with Luffy. After finally reaching Drum Island, the crew would be surprised to learn that Wapol was already exiled long ago, which would make Zoro and Luffy pretty disappointed since they wouldn't have to fight anyone. After docking the ship, the crew would notice that there were cherry blossoms all over the place and would soon see Chopper and Kiriha waving at them. So let's see what Chopper had been up to since he was reborn. First of all, Chopper valued his time with Look even more. This time around, knowing it would come to an end soon, before the doctor died, Chopper made sure to help him with his final project, creating cherry blossoms that could bloom in the snow. Afterward, Chopper went to live with Dr. Kodaha, and using his monster point, he was able to deal with all by himself. Later, Chopper met Ace when he arrived on the island in search of Blackbeard. Chopper let him know that Luffy would be meeting him soon in Alabasta. This confused Ace at first, but he chose to trust Chopper, sensing that the little reindeer was telling the truth. Anyway, after picking up Chopper, the crew would head straight to Alabasta. Instead of wasting their time with the rebels, they'd immediately make their way towards the capital. Using the knowledge they had from their previous life, the Straw Hats would easily find Crocodile's bomb and disarm it. Before it exploded, the crew would then team up with Ace, and Luffy would promise his brother that he would help him find Blackbeard. Luffy would do this in order to keep Ace safe and make sure he doesn't get imprisoned again. After all that, the crew, along with Ace. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Abhai grow naturally. Would easily defeat Crocodile and all of his Baroque Works agents. With all that settled, the Straw Hats and Ace would leave VV behind and head for Jaya. Luffy, Ace, and Zoro would then confront Blackbeard right then and there, almost destroying the entire island in the process. However, despite their combined effort, I still believe Blackbeard would manage to escape somehow, possibly by using his devil fruit in some way or by threatening to kill some of the civilians. Anyways, after Blackbeard escaped, Luffy and Ace would part ways, with Ace promising Luffy that he'd be careful not to get caught. The Straw Hats would then be on their way, completely forgetting about Scipia, that is until the knock-up stream suddenly sent them flying up anyway. Ace, Scipia, Zoro and Sanji would volunteer to go first and defeat Annel's forces. Considering Luffy is the only one immune to Annel's lightning, he would go and confront Annel directly. Annel would be absolutely surprised by Luffy's strength and haki this time around and would get defeated in minutes. Floating back to the blue planet surface, the Straw Hats would then set their sights on visiting Long Land. They wouldn't take part in the Daviback fights, however, since they'd rather just beat down Foxy's crew instead for terrorizing the locals. Eventually, they'd come face to face with their biggest threat so far, Akiji, so how would this encounter go? Well, believe it or not, the crew wouldn't actually have to fight Akiji at all this time. You see, since Saul survived, it's likely that he would stay in contact with Akiji, considering that the two of them were good friends prior to the Ohara incident. Because of this, Akiji would already know about Nico Robin and would not attempt to arrest her. Assessing the crew's strength, he'd warn them to stay on their best behavior or he'd be forced to take them down before taking his leave. With that done, the Straw Hats would then head towards Water 7 and would be surprised to see that the city looked way better than it used to. There, they'd meet Frankie at the shore working for Tom, who would also be alive in this scenario. After a quick chat with Frankie and the former Pirate King shipwreck, the Straw Hats would be led to a dock where they'd find the Thousand Sunny already made and ready to go. While the others checked out the ship, Frankie would start sharing his story with Luffy. Most of his childhood played out the same as in the original timeline, but one major change was that Frankie installed security systems on his warships as a kid. This prevented Spandam from ever taking control of the ships, which meant Tom survived. Later, when CP9 attempted to infiltrate the island, Frankie told everyone what they looks like, making it impossible for them to operate undercover. Over the years, they sent in agents to steal the blueprints by force, but Frankie and Tom's defense inventions kept the island safe. Luffy and the others would be absolutely impressed with Frankie and everything he managed to achieve. By the time they were ready to leave, Luffy would meet Gark, but would stand his ground against his grandfather this time. Although Gark would be impressed with his grandson, he is still much stronger than him and would send him flying soon after. The crew would then use Kuda Burst to reach their next destination, the Florian Triangle. There, they'd meet Brook again, who at this point had spent 50 years suffering through loneliness. You see, even though Brook tried to change his past and save his former crew, he was unfortunately unable to, and had to, live through that same tragedy all over again. Until now, Brook had crossed paths with Gecko Moria a few times, but always managed to keep his shadow and fight back. With the gang's help, Brook would then blitz through Moria's castle, and together they'd put an end to his twisted plans without Wars ever being reawakened. After absolutely destroying all of their enemies on the Grand Line, this Straw Hats would wind up getting a lot more attention than they did in their past lives. Pulling up to Savati Archipelago, they'd be instantly recognized by the locals. With most, if not everyone, staying out of their way, they'd head straight for Shaki's bar. Unable to find Rayleigh there, Luffy would head for the human auction house next in order to find him. There, he'd pick a fight with yet another celestial dragon before taking off with Rayleigh and tearing the entire place down. Despite the pacifistas and Kizaru pressuring them, the Straw Hats would easily handle the opposition before escaping the island. Since the Marines were on Savati, the Straw Hats, along with Rayleigh, would have to dock on some random nearby island in order to get their ship coated. There, they'd spend some time laying low before resuming their journey to Fishman Island. Once they got there, they would immediately meet Jinbei, who had already dealt with Hody Jones all by himself. It's here we learn Jinbei's full story. Growing up, Jinbei was still there to support Fisher Tiger through everything, even watching his captain walk toward his own demise despite all his warnings. Afterwards, Jinbei made a different choice. He refused to help Arlong escape from prison, which meant Arlong never made it to Nami's island in the first place. Instead, Jinbei focused on protecting the Ryugu kingdom from any bad actors, including Hody Jones. And because he still had his memories, he was even able to save Queen Otoheim from dying. Thanks to all of this, Jinbei became a hero on Fishman Island and one of the king's most trusted advisors. After listening to his story, the entire crew would be taken to Ryugu Palace for a magnificent feast. They'd spend a few days there to rest and would soon be on their way. On the other side of the Red Line, they'd soon arrive at Punk Hazard. Once they noticed the island is completely covered with poison as gas, Chopper would develop a drug to neutralize it before they set foot on land. They'd then dismantle Caesar's entire operation once again in order to save the kids. However, this is where we encounter another major difference in this scenario. You see, since the crew is much before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Apai grow naturally. Stronger now. They didn't need to train for 2 years, which means the time skip never happened. As a result, they would arrive on Punk Hazard much earlier than before and wouldn't meet Momonosuke or Kinemon. Movie would be confused to see that Momot isn't on the island, but the rest of the crew would explain why. Anyway, after saving the children, the crew would then set their sights on dealing with Doflamingo at Dressrosa. However, there is a problem here as well. You see, since the Straw Hats arrived on Punk Hazard and Dressrosa too early, they wouldn't meet Law, which would make their mission on Dressrosa much harder. One good thing this time around is that they would infiltrate Dressrosa completely undetected, since the news regarding Caesar's capture wouldn't spread. Instead of goofing around like that last time, the crew would immediately try to free the Tentata and dismantle the weapons factories, while Luffy would go and challenge Doflamingo one-on-one. However, this wouldn't end very well for him. You see, the problem here is that Luffy isn't aware of Sugar's abilities since the rest of the crew had saved him from her in the original timeline. So yeah, Luffy would get turned into a toy instantly without even touching the warlord. So it would be up to the other Straw Hats to deal with the situation, but could they do it? Well, I'm not sure if they could defeat Doflamingo on their own, but the good news is they wouldn't have to. And that's because they only needed to knock Sugar out. And considering that they managed to do it in the original timeline, they should be able to do it again. Once Sugar is defeated, Luffy would immediately spring back into action and easily finish Doflamingo, using his overwhelming haki. This victory would then send shock waves all around the globe, and the world government would want to catch the Straw Hats even more than before. However, the Marines wouldn't be the only ones chasing after them, since the Straw Hats would soon find themselves in the crosshairs of two Yonkos yet again. After briefly visiting Zaan, befriending the Mints, the crew would soon find themselves on Whole Cake Island. Now, you may be wondering, why would the crew even go to Whole Cake Island in this scenario? Well, even though they don't have to save Sanji this time around, Luffy would still want to stop by Whole Cake in order to grab Big Mom's Road Poneglyph, which he would need in order to become the Pirate King. So, with that goal in mind, they'd use Jinbei's experience to navigate through the islands in order to reach Whole Cake without any trouble and launch a surprise attack on the Emperor. And believe it or not, things would go mostly as planned. That's because despite Big Mom's overwhelming manpower, this version of the crew would be able to handle most of them with little to no difficulty. Zoro, Sanji, and Jinbei would take down Big Mom's sweet commanders one at a time while Luffy focuses on challenging her one-on-one. Meanwhile, Brook and Chopper would go off on their own to secure the Poneglyph rubbing. Using the knowledge about his devil fruit, Luffy would successfully tap into Gear 5 to dispatch Big Mom while Nami bribes Zeus into becoming her new slave. After Big Mom's defeat, the remaining Big Mom pirates would then retreat and vow to get payback for their humiliating loss. News of this sudden victory would rattle the world and send it into a frenzy soon after. Luffy would then be declared the fourth official Emperor of the Sea. Luffy and the crew would then continue their journey towards Wano, but they would suddenly get stopped by Ace. Remember, Ace didn't lose to Blackbeard in this version, so both he and Whitebeard would still be alive. After a brief chat with Luffy, Ace would ask him the rest of the crew to come aboard Whitebeard's ship. After moving Luffy, Whitebeard would immediately grow fond of him, same as he did during Marineford. However, it's here that Whitebeard would reveal his true reason for inviting the Straw Hats over, and that is to warn them about picking a fight with Kaido. However, Ace Luffy were talking about here, so of course he'd ignore Whitebeard's warning and tell him that he could fight whoever he wanted. This would make Whitebeard laugh, and seeing Luffy's determination, he would order Ace and Marco to go with the Straw Hats to Wano and help them in any way they could. It'd take them some time, but the Straw Hats along with Ace and Marco would soon reach Wano's shore. Now, even though the Straw Hats are way stronger this time around, taking Kaido and his crew head-on would still be an impossible task. So with Ace and Marco's help, they would carefully plan their attack, taking out Numbers and the Toby Rappo first in order to weaken the crew. Luffy and Ace would also work on a plan to free Yamato from her shackles, since she could help them in this fight as well. After making all necessary preparations, the Straw Hats allied with the Wano's samurai would launch a full attack on Kaido's forces. Although the Alliance did everything right, the sheer manpower of Kaido's crew would still pose a huge threat to them, and they would slowly start losing momentum. However, just as it seemed like the raid was going to fail, Luffy would notice a fleet of mysterious ships approaching the shore. As the ships got closer and closer, the Straw Hats would realize that it is actually Whitebeard's Grand Fleet. You see, although Whitebeard initially didn't want to risk a full-on war against Kaido, he couldn't just sit still and decided to risk it all and help the Straw Hats finally stop his tyranny once and for all. Seeing this would give a huge morale boost to everyone on the battlefield, and together with Whitebeard's forces, the tides of battle would quickly shift. In the middle of the chaos, Luffy would finally find a chance to engage Kaido head-on, and using his Gear 5 abilities, he would finally defeat the Emperor. After that, it wouldn't take long for the rest of the beast pirates to fall and the land of Wano would finally be freed again. Wow, I can't believe that all of these characters actually survived in this scenario. But did you ever wonder what would have happened if everyone Luffy asked actually joined the crew? Click on this video to find out. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Pie. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.